I take 5. Sometimes I think the largest group I took one time was 15. And we sat and talked and just relate to each other and help each other out.
I think the outdoors, not just military, I think anybody, it just relaxes people. You know, makes them enjoy what's out there more than, you know, the people that lives in the city, you know, I'm sure they got good lives, but the outdoors just seems to get that freedom feeling.
A lot of these veterans come back and they're depressed, and some even take their lives, and it's a horribly tragic situation. If we can get them invested and involved in whether it's dogs or cats or horses and mules, I don't know, it's the warmth of the animal and the ability to get out and see the world.
The thing that they say about is the quiet time and the peacefulness that they feel when they get out there on a horse or a mule.
Somebody who's never been on a horse or a mule before and get on something that's gentle and have a great time, it feels good.
When our nation's veterans came home from serving their country, the American Legion helped them with the GI Bill to get a head start. When they came home from Vietnam, we helped those affected with Agent Orange to get care and compensation. Now, there is a new war raging. Unfortunately, it is being fought in the hearts and minds of those who served. Veteran suicide is the most important issue facing veterans today, and too many are battling it alone. So join us, make the pledge, be the one to help the American Legion end veteran suicide.
Nothing is more important to the American Legion than preventing veteran suicide. We're not only to be the one, but it is the one, the number one issue for us. I'm excited about this next panel because this is a discussion that we need to have. We need to hear ideas. We need to always listen. One of our panelists, Dr. Thomas Joyner, is the director of the Florida State University Psychological Clinic. He has researched the topic for the Laboratory for the Study and Prevention of Suicide-Related Conditions and Behavior at Florida State University. He is joined by Ganassi Team Manager for the Extreme E program, Dave Berkenfield. Dave is a veteran of the Navy SEALs with more than 25 years serving in the U.S. military special operations community. The discussion will be moderated by Waco Hoover, the CEO of Vet TV. Waco is a Marine veteran who serves on the board of Irreverent Warriors, a nonprofit dedicated to veteran suicide prevention. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Joyner, Dave Berkenfield, and Waco Hoover.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's an honor to be here today to speak with all of you about an incredibly important topic. Before we jump in with our panelists, I just wanted to kind of throw out a couple numbers that really frames things and puts it in perspective. Since 2001, just about 7,000 U.S. service members have died, in combat, doing their jobs in the service of their country. Since 2001, over 120,000 veterans have taken their own lives. So let that number sink in for a minute, and just think about that. This is, one of the greatest crises facing our military community, and it's amazing that what the Legion's doing with respect to Be The One. You can go to betheone.org to learn more about the resources available. And we're gonna jump in to our panelists. We're incredibly fortunate to be joined by Dr. Joyner and Dave. Not only is suicide a focus for Dr. Joyner professionally, but also they're kind enough to share their own stories around the topic with us. Dave, I'm going to start off with you, if you wouldn't mind, leaning in and just kind of sharing a little bit about your background, your story, and your journey and experience with military suicide.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And, thank you for this whole group and your effort as an organization, and honesty and forthrightness about getting in front of this with Be the One. So, thank you for all the American Legion members. Like you mentioned, my name is Dave Berkenfield. I'm one of the team managers for Chip Ganassi Racing. I run one of his competition arms, if you will. Prior to that, I was in the Navy for 25 years. I was a SEAL for that whole time. So I am an American Legion member. Thank you. And so, I think my story with this really starts with my older brother. And my older brother lost his life to suicide. For me, it was an incredibly challenging time. It was coming back from an incredibly kinetic deployment in 2008, where my team lost 3 of our team members. That's an 18-man team. We lost 3 of our friends and teammates right into getting a phone call from the Las Vegas Police Department talking about my brother. So where this goes whole circle with the race team is the chief marketing officer of the race team wanted to have this conversation and wanted me to speak to the Legion. And at the time, this is 2 years ago, at the time I was not ready to do that. I was not ready. I was just getting out of the military, just retiring. I'm a firm believer, and like I've mentioned to you prior, once what you do here, what you see here, let it stay here when you leave here. And so I wasn't ready to even talk about my experience. I wasn't ready to talk about my background, my brother. But through those discussions, in realizing what this was about, in realizing the reach that the Legion had, realizing the reach the race team had, and those joint goals, the support that Chip Ganassi has for the veterans, in what we're trying to accomplish here, which is to change the dialogue, I said, hey, we're all in here. So whatever we can do, whatever I can do, I'm willing to do it, and I'm happy to be here speaking to you.
Thank you. Dr. Joyner, if you'd like to share a little bit, let's start with your personal story and what brought you to researching the subject matter of veteran suicide.
Happy to do that, Waco, and happy to be here with you all this morning. It's deeply personal to me. It runs in my family, suicide does. I lost my dad, for example. He was a veteran. He served as a Marine. There have been other deaths, too, so it's profoundly personal to me. In addition to that, though, I've specialized in it professionally. I'm a scientist trying to figure out why this happens and what to do about it. I'm a clinician, a mental health professional, in my case, a clinical psychologist. I see patients, mostly who are suicidal, trying to mitigate, intervene, prevent. And so from all those angles, I have a perspective on this tragedy, and as has been mentioned, it is a tragedy to be sure. And that's the bad news. The good news is that there's hope. There's prevention. There are ways forward that we may be able to turn this really tragic phenomenon around and do better on it.
So to start us off, you talked about your theory of suicidal behavior, if I got that right. If you could maybe just kind of set the stage for that, I think that'll be a great way to dive into the conversation. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, happy to do that. It's a pretty simple idea, really. It's a three-pronged idea. One idea is if you feel like you don't belong, that hurts. That's painful to humans. We need each other, and if you feel like you don't belong, it really hurts, as does the feeling of there's no point to you. If you feel like you don't contribute, you don't have a purpose, those two things are painful, and when they combine in the same person, deeply painful, and people who experience that think about suicide pretty regularly. But the third aspect of the model is important to understand. It asks the question, okay, of all the people who have ideas about suicide, why do only some of them act on those ideas? And the model's answer is because suicide's hard. It's scary. It's fearsome. And it scares a lot of people off, even deeply suicidal people. So that third variable is the wherewithal, so to speak, the capacity to die by suicide. And so when those three things come together, capacity or wherewithal, you might call it, feeling like you're a burden and feeling like you don't belong, that's the danger zone where we get really worried clinically and we do what we can do to intervene.
Thank you. Dave, could you talk a little bit about some of your experiences with team members that were on the precipice and some of the things that you and your team, your community did to intervene at some level?
Yeah, for sure. I think that for me, this conversation started in about 2003, and we'd come home from a deployment. We had one of my teammates, one of my friends, actually, honestly, he got in some trouble. And so, speaking about that loss of community, he was looking at, being kicked out of the teams, the embarrassment there, the trouble, and he ended up taking his life in a really pretty heinous scenario. And so, at his memorial, a group of teammates that were friends with him sat around and really just had this sort of fireside chat about, hey, how do we as a group of friends that just sat through one of our best friends' memorial take action, if you will. And it was nothing official, right? Like what it was at that time is it was, hey, we're going to do something. I don't know what that is, but if this presents itself, we're going to do something. And where this goes, maybe 10 years later, I get a phone call from another teammate. Hey, I'm worried about somebody. Remember we talked about this, and it connected back there. And do you know where he works now? I ran into him at a foundation event, and it happened to be, he works for me. And so, I had to have that sort of interesting moment of being like, hey, something that I remember being part of at a memorial 10 years ago has now come full circle. And so I reached out to one of our team psychologists that I was very close with and talked through what the right way to approach this was, knowing that it was pretty ugly. And he and I just reached out to him and said, hey, let's go out to dinner, go out to lunch. And, we sat there and talked for a while and we got through that moment. And at the end of that, he said, I'm not sure I was there, but I really appreciate this conversation. I really appreciate the fact that I have teammates that are looking out for me. And I think that that's a good example of what a first step is it's being open to have that hard conversation with somebody. And I think it really, it speaks to part of what Be the One is. So I think for me, that promulgated for many years to being part of a leader and part of my leadership mantra, with the people that worked for me or that I worked with, was just making sure that they had my number, right? They have my number. They know I'm interested in them. I want to talk to them. And for me, uniquely, I think maybe they believed it. Maybe because it is. I really feel that way. Maybe it's the story of losing my brother. Maybe it's the feeling of putting my foot forward into saying, hey, I want to make a difference. I've received a lot of those calls and more calls than I think sometimes I'd like to deal with, but I'm there and I'm dealing with them. And I deal with them, probably once a year. So, and I feel like just making sure that people know you're there is a critical part of this.
Yeah, it's you mentioned Be the One. Why this program's so powerful, because you and your community proactively reached out to the individual you just mentioned in 2013, and then it was a decade later where that could have saved that individual's life. But if it wasn't for that proactive nature of it, it could have had a very different outcome.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, that's always the question is, you don't know, you can't get in everyone's head, right? And the point is you're not necessarily talking them off the ledge. I think the whole idea is that we need to get ahead of that conversation. It's a conversation about trust. It's a conversation about trust and then also knowing that people care, right? Like you mentioned being alone, right? Feeling like you're on that island is not where we want people to be. It's like that is the problem. Being on the island is the first thing you said. So,
And it's in someone's head, so unless you ask, there's no way to identify that. And Dr. Joyner, you've talked about different resources available to not just active duty service members, but friends, family, so that all of us, most of us in this room, fall into that category now in terms of looking out for our respective loved ones. And so, could you talk a little bit about some of those things?
Most of it, luckily, fortunately, is pretty simple. Simple things make a huge difference. In this domain, treatment works, for instance, for things like depression, anxiety, PTSD. They're hard to deal with for sure, no question, but the treatments generally work. So encouraging people to access treatment. A good route to do that are resources like 988. If you're a veteran, hit 988. It's a simple thing to remember, a good access point. Another access point is your primary care physician. They see a lot of this. They know how to manage it. They know what to do. Another idea, if you're a religious person, is a clergy member. They also see a lot of this and know what to do. The key is to access that touch point so that the people in the touch point can send you on to get high quality treatment. But things like being safe with dangerous things, if somebody's at risk for death and there's a dangerous object in their hand or right nearby, it makes sense to put some distance between that at-risk person and the dangerous object. That's called lethal means safety. The secretary mentioned it. It's a really important idea, and it's not real hard to do. It's simple. Caring connection, reaching out to people, friends, loved ones, being the one for a fellow veteran, being the one for a friend, being the one for a family member. But also, here's an interesting take on that. We need to do a better job of being the one for ourselves, because sometimes you're the only one who knows that there's anything to matter. You're a human. You have inherent worth and dignity and uniqueness and individuality. You deserve to be rescued too. Self-rescue is an interesting frontier that we need to think about and make progress on. It's a huge challenge, but I think there's potential there.
Well, it's you talked about most of us think of valor and heroism, downrange and combat, but once you transition, you get out. For everybody in this room, depending on where you're at, the most heroic thing you may ever do for your family is to actually raise your hand and say, "I need help." Wanted to just chat about the stigma associated with asking for help. Everybody in this room, you served, and showing weakness is not something that the military reinforces. It's suck it up, let's get the mission done, and being tough and hard. And so, what was it like, in the teams culturally? I'd just love to hear how you guys expand on that.
Yeah, I think culturally we're still challenged with this, right? There's not a switch. The SEAL teams culturally are a very hard culture to live in. We expect a lot out of people. The signs of weakness are not something that's looked at favorably. I think that there's a way to bridge that with being passionate about your teammates, right? And knowing the level of expectation that you need to do professionally, the work you need to do professionally, but also knowing the toll that job has. And I say that blanketly for the whole military, right? Everyone's military experience is different. Mine is different than yours, and so I think that culturally asking for help is still we have a lot of work to do there, right?
And Dr. Joyner, from your standpoint, when people transition out, what are you seeing in terms of the research and what that's looking like?
Well, for the vast majority of people, we talked about this a little bit last night, Waco. For the vast majority, they thrive. They do great. But there is a percentage who don't, and it's that group where that transition process can be very challenging. And it's at a very time when resources are shifting. That's not a great combination, a high-risk window where resources are shifting from the active duty environment elsewhere, the VA, for instance. And that's reconnecting, getting that transition window smoothed over and reconnected to care as needed is key. It's life-saving. I think an important point, though, is so many people thrive and do great things, but there is that percentage that don't, and we need to look out for them too.
I would also add on to that the transition from the military into civilian life, incredibly hard, well documented, incredibly hard. But I would also say that there's other transitions that are similar, whether it's from good health to poor health, whether it's from regionally, you're moving, whether it's financial transition, whether it's lifestyle transition, divorce. All those are critically, moments where you need to weigh in a little bit.
Dovetailing off that, Dave, you talked about, I think it was the Virginia Performance Institute, and just kind of that holistic approach to, mental health is not, there's many aspects that contribute to mental health. Could you just share a little bit about kind of that approach? I think that's such an important thing for us to be cognizant of.
Yeah, I think for me, I got hurt in 2008 in a chewed up body, broken backs, like all of it. But you're honestly hiding that a little bit, right? Like through the end of your career, you're hiding it, crawling around on your hands and knees saying, I'm good, even though your back is not. And so for me, when I decided to make the decision to retire and said, hey, I'm not going to keep going, it was, I had the opportunity to go through a program, like you mentioned, called the Return to Service program, run by Virginia High Performance in Virginia.
I really butchered that one, huh?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. And it is a holistic health program, right? Like it's run by an ex-team guy. It's a good friend of mine. And it's, it's a pause. For me, it was a pause, a 5-week pause to just say, hey, mind, body, spirit, every piece of it, let's just take a moment and look at it. And during a transition period for me, it was pretty centering, right? Like it was speech pathologists, it was nutritionists, it was, trainers. It was based on my experience, really, really good. And I think that sort of checking out from all the other craziness you got going on and saying, I'm going to focus on myself for a little bit, it resonated with me for sure.
And speaking of that, Dr. Joyner, from a research standpoint, it's such a fascinating area that you're leaning into. I mean, what are you seeing in terms of things that dovetail kind of off of those experiences that Dave went through, or just again, like I said, in the academic research world that really drives so many new things. We're talking about Be the One. What are new things that we can do to help solve this problem?
I must say there's not all that much new that's breaking currently. I wish there were. There's some possibilities, some medications, some new kinds of psychoactive agents that are promising, but that's not quite clear yet. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that simple things that we've known for a while work. I've mentioned me and safety, carrying contacts, going to see your primary care physician, very down-to-earth things. Those are the things that work. And if we can facilitate people actually doing those things, that will drive suicide rates down. Currently, they don't do those things. So that's a real important frontier, is encouraging people to actually do those rather simple things that can make all the difference.
I would say just, to pivot on that a little bit, something that's incredibly natural that I think people are not doing now is just being present, right? Like everybody is just living in this super busy world, super digitized world, through social media, through the news, the 24-hour news cycle. And I think that just being present is maybe something we all could do a little bit better, and some self-reflection there. So.
Well, social connections save lives, and that's one of the extraordinary things about the Legion and this initiative. You were a part of kind of how the genesis for the Be the One idea. Would you mind just talking a little bit more about kind of exactly what that means, Be the One? There's I think we all get it, but it's a very simple, which is that's part of the elegance of it, but it's also a really powerful thing if we all kind of embrace that mentality.
Yeah. So. Once I sort of made the decision here that I'm going to get behind this effort, right? Like we need to start making a difference. We need to look at this. one of the very first things you're looking at is the metrics, right? Like, how do we actually make a difference? Like, what is success? How do you measure success? Everyone has heard the number 22, right? Okay, we've all heard it. Let's let that go, right? I think that where this really stemmed is I had the opportunity to sit with Dean, the Chief Marketing Officer of the American Legion, at one of the IndyCar hospitality events. And we're just talking through this and spitball and stuff and looking at a few decks that Dean and his great team had put together. And I'm looking at them and we're trying to identify what this is, right? But in the back of my head, the whole time we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about my brother. I'm thinking about my buddy Chad. I'm thinking about my buddy John. And their faces are just like pounding into me. And as good as all these products were, and they were professionally done. It's like put them together and sort of slid it over at Dean and said, this is not what we're hunting, right? Like what we are hunting right now is one of my friends or my brother still being here, right? If we save one life, we have won, right? Let's be okay with that. Let's be okay with that. And I think that has obviously grown, right? Like as we've had more of these discussions, it's grown as anything grows. And I think that's, that was the first baby breath, if you will. And I really feel like, I'm proud of that conversation. It means a lot to me, but I feel like there's a lot more to offer, right? The things that you just mentioned, being the one to reach out, being the one to ask for help. It's not all about saving one life, but that's where it started, right? And we're going to grow it, and we're going to continue to grow it. Right.
Well, I just feel the same way about my family members, and this is for them in a way, but in a way it's not, because they're gone, and there's nothing I can do about them. There's nothing I can do for them. I can save a life tomorrow, though. I can save a life next week, and I'm convinced that we actually do that at clinics like what I run through 988, through primary care. That's my focus is, he's always on my mind in this regard, it's true, but he's gone. I can't do anything about that. I can do something about a vulnerable person tomorrow, and I take solace in that.
So, we talked about, the stigma associated with asking help. We talked about, culturally and, in the media, outside the military, you've seen countless, professional athletes start to raise their hand and be more vocal about their struggles with mental health. Dave, question for you. Do you think that's something that the military, outside the teams, generally speaking, what are some ways we can do better with that? When the people that you look up to, that you serve with, if they're willing to kind of raise their hand, you mentioned we're kind of far away from that, but are there some things that you can think that we could do to support each other without having that perception of weakness?
Yeah, I think it's interpersonal connectivity. Right, like, yeah, you might be a senior leader, enlisted leader, officer corps, whatever it is, that can take a pause, and you can still be a person, right? And you can sort of put that stuff aside. I think that if I was going to say one thing that maybe the military could do better there is it's those relationships, right, outside of chain of command, right? And I've seen success there. I've seen success, and it does work, right? But to do that, you need to be able to separate the two, professionally separate the two, and then be able to have an A conversation, and then similarly have a B conversation. And so I think that would be one of the things that I would say is, interpersonal communications need to grow there a little bit.
Well, I remember when I was an NCO, there was no training or course that I ever got about interpersonal communications or even relationships or anything like that. The emotional intelligence aspect of it.
Yeah.
And Thomas, one last question that I have for you. So you mentioned, obviously, losing your father, and along the way, we talked about, kind of signals that you could see. Was there anything there that you could identify? I know you've written books on this and everything, but just that's something that all of us can learn along the way.
In retrospect, clearly. So I was a very young man at the time. I didn't really know anything. And so looking back, he had bipolar disorder, mostly untreated for all of his life. He was really depressed in the weeks leading up to his death. That was very apparent. but I didn't know at the time what that was. And so if somebody had said to me, you know, he should go see his doctor about this. He should talk. He was a very religious person, my dad. He should talk to, you know, his clergy person about this. I would have definitely gotten on that, and that could have made all the difference. I just didn't know anything back then. And so that's one thing I'm encouraged about with events like this, is building person by person through grassroots, the understanding that this happens to people, happens to a lot of people, nothing to be ashamed of, and there's something that we can do in response to prevent it and to take the edge off of it so that, yeah, maybe it's a bad time, a crisis, but it doesn't end up being deadly. That's my goal, is to take crises from lethal levels down a notch or two so that it can still be kind of bad and a difficult time. But if you're dead, we don't get a chance to work on that together. If we can take that lethality down a couple notches, then we can figure the rest of it out.
So we only have a couple minutes left, but in the spirit of Be the One, wanted to kindly ask everybody in the audience to indulge us in an exercise. Would like everybody to, if you know somebody, friend, family member who has struggled with mental health or suicide, to please stand up. Now look around to your left, to your right. Don't be afraid to go over and have a conversation, because there's a good chance that somebody who you're seeing who shares that experience with you may be a resource, may have some help for you. Just like these two gentlemen were talking about, it starts with each and every one of us, and not being afraid to have the conversation. Dave?
Yeah, so I would just like to sort of close this with something that I had a very close teammate of mine, a slogan, and it was, at what level are you willing to participate? And it was how we lived our life, right? We need to participate at the highest level. Everyone in this room is somehow or another associated with the service. At one point, you joined the military for a higher calling, a higher purpose. You found that camaraderie. I would ask you, as a veteran now and as part of the American Legion, in part of this Be the One campaign, at what level are you willing to participate, right? And I would just say, each one of you has the opportunity to be that one. So let's start it right here. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
If I could I have you join me up here on stage in just a moment, please? Present y'all something we'll take a picture of.